and was a founding partner in the A&D Museum in Los Angeles. He is currently the CEO of Constructs LLC, a design firm in Accra, Ghana. So without further ado, Mr. Joe Addo, please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, students. It's a great pleasure to kind of talk to you. Unfortunately, I can't see you. I wish I could see you. But it's a real pleasure, and greetings from a very sunny and hot Accra. It's very, very hot here indeed. I will say to you that the given topic of structure, I will slightly deviate from it and really talk about structure in terms of more in terms of a metaphor of how our cultures and our histories, Africa, and particularly here in Ghana, is linked to the West, particularly America. So I think, and I would encourage you to really, I want this to be more of a Q&A, a question and kind of answer format, so I can get to know you, both in Canada and also in Florida, and you also know Ghana, and hopefully these images, I will touch on the history of Ghana, pre-colonial, all the way through to contemporary Ghana. And then, of course, I'd love to show you some of my own work. And I think it's important to see how Ghana is developing, like everywhere else, into a contemporary society. So shall we go with the first slide? This title of Why Have We Abandoned the Mud Hut, to me, is very apropos for Earth's Day. I think, as with most parts of the world, we're losing touch of who we are. And I think, to me, the mud hut is not a literal interpretation of, the round circular buildings that you see on TV or in documentaries, but rather going back to a way that we ought to live, optimizing our lives through harnessing our resources properly and not waste it. Next slide. So you can see here, trying to link what was happening in the Americas and also here in Ghana, which was then called the Gold Coast. Next slide. This is a very famous picture of one of the slave castles, and we all know about the slavery from most parts of Africa, and the slaves being taken to the Caribbean and also North America. So this was a very famous, this is the front, like the exit gate from one of the big fortresses to the slave ships. I'm sure you've all learned about the First World War and the Second World War, and you can imagine what was happening both in Europe and in the Americas and also in Africa. You should remember that Africa was, at this time, had been colonized by the British and the French and the Germans and the Italians and so forth. So whatever happened in Europe also had a direct impact on here. Next slide. So I think we'll flick through these quickly, and feel free to interrupt Grace at any given point, or the students can, as we move forward. Yeah. Next slide. We'll just go. Clearly, I'm an architect, so some of these iconic buildings reflect a period in Ghana's history where modernism moved. When I say modernism, it's like post-Second World War architecture. I don't know if you all know about the Bauhaus movement in Germany. Does anyone know about the Bauhaus movement?
So students from Westmount Charter or South Plantation. Who said yes?
Can you hear me, students?
Westmount Charter, can you hear?
Yeah, right now we don't really know what the Bauhaus movement is, but we would like to know more information on it.
Well, the Bauhaus movement was an expression of a new way of thinking about architecture and buildings, which emanated out of Germany, really. And some of the proponents of this movement actually moved to America and settled in places like Chicago. So names like Mies van der Rohe ring a bell, Walter Gropius, and so forth. So anyway, this was a movement which swept across Europe into the Americas, and it actually came had roots also here in Africa. So this is one of the buildings, one of the early proponents of this building, right here in Ghana. Next slide. You can imagine the 60s, very momentous period in the world's history. Civil rights, the moon landing, and also Ghana's first military coup. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. I think we'll flick through this quickly now so that you guys can just have a broad sense of Ghana and so forth. Next slide. Obama. We love him here, by the way. Next slide. This is me in northern Ghana. This is a typical mud hut. And I think it's a great metaphor of how I think we ought to live. Next slide. These are slides begins to show the kind of the large cities of Ghana as opposed to the more rural settings. So the slide on the left, for example, is of the capital, and the one on the right is of the northern regional capital. So we'll flick through these slides to show the dichotomy that is Africa. Next slide. Next slides. Next slide. This is some of the projects that we're working on, and you can see this is in northern Ghana, and northern Ghana is predominantly Muslim. So it's a very different kind of setting than southern Ghana, which is predominantly Christian. And so this project is an entry gateway, and the inspiration is from the structure of the wings of a bird, which is symbolic of the northern culture. Next slide. Street signs, which are inspired by traditional wall paintings of the north. Next slide. We also, again, very interested in the structure of bamboo. So we play a lot around with bamboo, which grows a lot in West Africa. And all these images of the bamboo are found in my own house, which you will see shortly. Let me take this out. Okay, just click through. Go through. Next slide. So good. So this is the structure of my house under construction. And in Ghana, most buildings are built out of concrete. And so my house, I decided to build it out of mud blocks. And you can imagine it's quite a radical approach to construction here in Ghana, at least, or at least in most parts of the world. So again, just going back to this notion of structure and how one can think differently using the same principles that we all adhere to. Next slide. You can see go back for a minute. We recycle all the water. The little slide on the right shows all the barrels which we use as cisterns. Next. Next. So this is the finished house, which is all mud and timber. Next slide. Then we'll just flick this through quickly. So this is jumping scales now.
If you don't mind me pausing for a moment, I want to
Absolutely.
Take a step back when you were showing us the historical context between Ghana and the States, and even taking a look at the dichotomy between contemporary urban Ghana and contemporary rural Ghana. I want to ask the